To introduce the letter Q in an English language course, the most appropriate tune is, of course, God Save the Queen, our dear Queen, who is Queen not only of England and the rest of the United Kingdom, but also of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and head of the whole worldwide Commonwealth of nations with their ties of shared history and culture and language.
You know, I always associate the letter Q with ships in exotic places. I think it's because of that fantastically atmospheric poem by John Masefield called Cargoes. The one that begins with the majestic and glorious word Quinquereme. Quinquereme of Nineveh, from distant Ophir, rowing home to haven in sunny Palestine,
with a cargo of ivory and apes and peacocks,
sandalwood, cedarwood, and sweet white wine.
What marvellous use of language! A poem like that cries out to be spoken with a good and attractive accent. It would be sacrilege to do otherwise.
And isn't Quinquereme a glorious and evocative word to get your tongue round? It doesn't matter one iota that quinqueremes were really ancient warships with 5 banks of oars and stuffed with fighting men, not cargo vessels carrying sandalwood, cedarwood,
or even sweet white wine. This is poetry, not naval history.
But we mustn't stay in harbour, even to watch in our imagination Masefield's majestic quinqueremes and all the other ships in his poem. Stately Spanish galleons full of gold moidores and dirty British coasters with salt-caked smokestacks. It's high time to up anchor and embark on our study of the letter Q.
On board this time are Andy and the Professor himself, who felt he needed a little cruise in tropical seas to recover from all his mental exertions.
And it sounds as though there's a bit of trouble about the deck games.
What's going on?
Queuing cliques requesting quoits quarrelled loquaciously.
The letter Q is almost always followed by U.
Sometimes the U is silent, as in cliques and quoits, and we hear only a hard C sound.
But more often the U is sounded, and in this case the usual sound of the Q-U combination is the one we hear in requesting, quarrelling, and loquaciously, which is the sound of a hard C followed by a W.
We'll call this sound QU1, but we must note 2 important exceptions to this usual way of pronouncing QU.
These exceptions are the name of the letter Q and the word Q, both of which have a different U sound and are pronounced exactly like the Q used in playing billiards or snooker.
The word Q has been adopted from French, but the English have made it peculiarly their own by the native stoicism with which they patiently queue for buses and taxis and at the doors of shops that are having a sale.
Even in these days of degenerate behaviour and lack of common courtesy, queuing remains a quintessentially English phenomenon.
It seems appropriate, therefore, that when English children were taught manners and polite behaviour, they were told to mind their P's and Q's. It's an old expression whose origins are much argued about.
Some say it derives from the days of the Ancien Regime in France, when dancing masters taught their aristocratic pupils to mind their feet, pieds, and their wigs, which had little tails on them, the queues, when performing the convoluted steps required in dancing at court, but that explanation seems very far-fetched.
Others give it a homegrown origin and say that it derives from the hard-drinking taverns of 18th century England, when beer was consumed by the pint or the quart, which is 2 pints, and the tavern keeper wrote up on a slate how many P's and Q's, pints and quarts, you had consumed.
But that too seems improbable. More probably, it came simply from teaching children to write nicely, and to be especially careful about the letters P and Q. Children learning to write often confuse these 2 letters, as they do B and D.
But when I was at primary school and we were told to mind our P's and Q's, it meant remember to say please and thank you. And that seems to me to be the likeliest of all, and certainly the most valuable. The same teacher who taught us to mind our P's and Q's also said, I want doesn't get, meaning that you had to make your requests politely and say, please may I have, not I want.
Whatever the origin of the phrase, it's a good one. Minding one's P's and Q's is a good rule in a civilized society, and it applies as strongly to pronunciation as to anything else.
And of course the word polite comes from the Greek word for city or state, polis. Politeness and good manners are the lubrication of social relations. It's very important to mind our P's and Q's.
But we digress. Let's return to pronunciation and practice pronouncing QU1 as in request or quarrel. You start by slightly opening your mouth and pressing the rear of your tongue hard against the concave part of your palate, with its sides against the inside edges of your top side teeth and its tip just behind the small gap between your teeth and lips.
You then push your lips forward in a cartoon kiss, leaving just a small hole between them, as though you were going to whistle. And as you produce the air, you pull back your chin, tongue, and lips.
And you should feel the sound being made where your tongue had been pressed against your palate.
As you get used to making the sound, you'll find that you don't need to protrude your lips so much, but it helps at the beginning to make the cartoon kiss shape.
Watch and listen carefully now as we make the sound and say some words.
Qua, qua, quack, quench, queen, quit.
Qua, qua, quite, quote, equal, equity.
Now you make the QU1 sound and say those words.
Now we're going to give you 2 longer groups of examples to practice. Listen carefully to the first group, in which each word begins with QU1.
Quack, quadrangle, quadrant, quaff.
Quadrilateral, qualify, quality, quandary.
Quantify, quantity, quarrel, quarry, quell.
Quaint, quake, quarter, quest, question.
Querulous, queen, queasy, queer, quick, quid.
Quill, quilt, quince, quinquereme, quintet, quintuple.
Quit, quiver, quiz, quiet, quite, quorum.
Quota, quote, quotation, quotient.
And before you practice those words, I beg you to take care to avoid using the verb quote as a noun.
This is a nasty modern habit that grinds on the educated ear. The noun is quotation, just as the noun from the verb invite is invitation, though we now regrettably hear invite used as a noun.
It makes me squirm every time I hear it, and things are getting worse all the time. Even the verb disconnect is now being used as if it were a noun by crass politicians and BBC reporters.
Sloppy speech means sloppy thinking, I'm afraid. The chipped and dirty glass usually contains sour and nasty wine, made carelessly and not fit to drink.
We feel better now for having got that off our chests. Now, you say that list of words beginning with QU1.
And relish that wonderful word, quinquireme.
And now we'll have the second group of examples in which the QU1 combination is not at the beginning of words.
Harlequin, equal, inequality.
Squash, squat. Aquatic, loquacity, loquacious.
Request, sequence, consequence, squeeze.
Marquis, relinquish, vanquish, requisition.
Equip, liquid, equitation, sequin.
Acquire, inquire, require, squirm, squirt.
Equity, equine, colloquy, obloquy. Now you say those words, exactly as we did.
And before we go on to practice words with the silent U, let's just practice the exceptions to the usual pronunciation of the sounded QU combination. The name of the letter Q and the word Q.
We'll be looking at all the U sounds in detail when we get to that letter, but for the present, let's just make sure we can pronounce Q and the word Q correctly.
Start by opening your mouth slightly and pressing the rear of your tongue hard against the concave part of your palate and its front sides against the inside edges of your top side teeth, exactly as for QU1. But this time, you keep the front of your tongue firmly down behind your lower front teeth, and you protrude your lips no more than was necessary as you press the back surface of your tongue against your soft palate.
As you produce the sound, you raise your tongue and chin, slightly protruding and immediately retracting your chin as you do so, and bringing your lips quite close together. Watch and listen carefully as we do it.
Q, Q,
Q, Q.
Now watch and listen to the difference between this sound and the usual QU1.
Quick, Q,
Quaint, Q.
The QU2 sound, which is simply a hard C sound, does not need practicing.
It only rarely begins a word, as it does in quoit, and it is most often found in QUE word endings, as in clique.
The words in which it is found are almost always words adopted from foreign languages. Listen to the following examples. Quoit, racket, tequila, clique, peak, unique.
Grotesque, baroque, burlesque, monique, risque.
Now you say those QU2 words.
And now we'll end where we began. Listen again to our opening sentence.
Queuing cliques requesting quoits, quarrelled loquaciously.
Passengers on long cruises with too much time on their hands
And hangovers from too much drinking.
become bad-tempered and querulous. On this ship they formed themselves into antagonistic cliques and were quarrelling with each other even about their deck games.
Anyway, you tell us now about the cliques that quarrelled loquaciously as they queued to request quoits.
It sounds as though Andy and the Prof are coming into port, and their cruise liner will soon be tying up at the quay. I hope they had a smooth voyage and didn't feel queasy.
I trust too that after our own gentle passage through the letters P and Q, we're all now sufficiently rested to face the rigours of wrestling with the wretchedly problematic letter R.